Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into Guadalajara, Mexico, in the early summer light, where the air is still dusty from the long dry season. You can almost feel the grit in your throat as the city wakes, trucks rattling over cracked asphalt, vendors rolling carts into the market, and stray dogs darting between cars. But somewhere behind thick walls, Ignacio Coronel Villarreal is already awake, sipping black coffee at a polished wooden table as he stares at a map of Mexico dotted with pins and notes. He's thinking about shipments, crystal meth shipments, that will soon cross the border hidden in compartments so sophisticated most of us wouldn't even notice them if we were leaning against the truck. And let's be real. You probably wouldn't survive even a single night in this world, where one wrong glance could end your story before it began. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know your location and the local time where you're listening in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. He sits there longer than usual, glancing at his phone, but not checking messages. He likes these early moments, the house silent, except for the distant hum of traffic. Outside, security men watch the gates and peer through mirrored sunglasses, scanning for cars that don't belong. Ignacio doesn't show fear. He's been doing this too long, but there's always an edge. At 46, he knows the Mexican army and federal police have been building cases for years, waiting for a crack in his armor. His empire didn't build itself overnight. Years earlier, he was just another ambitious operator, setting up meth labs deep in the hills of Jalisco, where the smell of chemicals would blend into the open air. He learned how to process crystal with brutal efficiency, and soon his product was flooding the U.S. market, pure enough to push rivals off the map. That's when people started calling him the Crystal King of Guadalajara, but that kind of title paints a target on your back. He knows the Beltran-Leyva brothers have spies in Guadalajara, just as the government does. He hears rumors that Arturo Beltran's people are trying to buy off local cops, and he doesn't like it. He writes names on a notepad: police captains, city officials, even judges. Some of those names are circled. There's also the Sinaloa Federation to think about. Ignacio's allegiance to Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and Ismael El Mayo Zambada is as much about survival as loyalty. They need him because nobody else can keep the meth routes as efficient, but alliances can sour overnight. He remembers how quickly the Beltran-Leyva brothers went from allies to enemies when the wrong whispers reached the wrong ears. The morning light cuts through the blinds as he folds the map and stands, stretching his back. He walks out to the garden, where bougainvillea blooms spill red and purple against the stone walls. For a second, it almost feels normal, like any other man's life. But then one of his guards murmurs that a car has been parked 2 blocks away for more than an hour. He simply nods. He's learned not to show agitation. In the kitchen, he passes his niece, who's making tortillas for breakfast. She smiles nervously, asking if he'll be joining the family at the table. He shakes his head. "Not today," he says quietly, brushing her shoulder as he moves toward the hallway. Family has always been important to him, but he knows too well how close ties can be used as leverage. He thinks about moving them all to a safe house soon, away from Guadalajara's busy streets. Later that morning, he steps into a black SUV, the windows tinted so dark you can barely see the shape of his face inside. As the convoy moves toward a discreet warehouse on the city's edge, He looks out the window and thinks of how many lives his product touches, not just customers, but soldiers, cops, politicians, even bankers. He doesn't feel guilt anymore, but there's an awareness. He wonders briefly if it will all come crashing down in one spectacular moment, or if it will be the slow suffocation that takes most men like him. He's received word that one of his largest labs is under watch. He suspects a leak, maybe from a lower-level worker bribed by authorities. If that lab goes down, millions of dollars disappear overnight, and more importantly, the army will tighten the net. He decides to send scouts to check roads leading in and out, but he won't step foot near the location himself. That's one mistake too many traffickers have made, showing up in person when the pressure is on. Still, there's a stubborn streak in him. He tells his men to prepare contingency plans. Hidden in his mind are escape routes through backcountry roads, stash houses that nobody in his inner circle even knows exist, and safe deposits stuffed with enough cash to restart anywhere. He's not the type to leave Mexico, though. Guadalajara is home, and he believes a king doesn't abandon his throne. As the SUV pulls into the warehouse gates, guards step aside, rifles at their chests. Inside, Ignacio reviews ledgers, containers marked for departure, and security footage of trucks loading in the dead of night. It all runs like clockwork, but he knows how quickly that can change. And as he leaves that day, a breeze sweeps dust across the hood of the SUV. He catches his reflection in the glass and barely recognizes the man staring back, calm, methodical, but with lines deeper than they should be for his age. Many people still think he's untouchable, a ghost who can vanish before authorities get close. So what do you think? Can anyone really stay invisible forever? The SUV vanishes into traffic, heading back into the heart of Guadalajara as the day grows hotter, the streets louder, and Ignacio's mind begins to drift toward the next decision that could either fortify his empire or start its collapse. The morning in Guadalajara fades into a hazy, sun-bleached afternoon as Ignacio Coronel Villarreal sits behind a broad oak desk at one of his less frequented properties. It's a ranch-style home, set back behind layers of fencing, cameras, and guards who look as if they've never smiled. Inside, the air is cool and dim, heavy with the smell of polished wood and cigarette smoke. Ignacio keeps his voice low, even though no one outside his inner circle is allowed inside these walls. Across from him sit two of his most trusted lieutenants, Ramon, tall and sharp-eyed with a military precision in the way he folds his hands, and Tacho, rounder in build but no less lethal, his face a mask of stoic focus. Ignacio studies them carefully before speaking. "There's talk," he says. "Family talk." He doesn't elaborate immediately. Instead, he lets the silence settle, watching for reactions. They shift slightly. Ramon clears his throat. "We've heard the same," he admits. "Some of the boys think your nephew, Jesus, isn't pulling his weight. Others think he's talking too much to outsiders." Ignacio nods slowly. He's heard the whispers. Jesus is young, eager to prove himself, but sometimes that eagerness carries a recklessness that could become dangerous. "Family is family," Ignacio says. "But the business doesn't forgive mistakes. We protect our blood, but not at the cost of everything we've built." Tacho glances toward Ramon as if weighing whether to speak. Finally, he says, "Do we bring him in? Test his loyalty?" Ignacio leans back in the chair, rubbing a thumb along his jawline. "No tests," he replies. "I'll speak with him myself. A direct word from me carries weight. If there's anything to be worried about, I'll know." This isn't the first time family has complicated his operations. Years ago, when the Sinaloa Federation was still expanding aggressively, Ignacio had been forced to cut ties with a cousin who'd gambled away cartel money in Juarez. That man had disappeared within a week. Whether by Ignacio's order or someone else's was never clear. Ignacio still remembers the way the family avoided eye contact at gatherings for months afterward, but the stakes are even higher now. The meth trade is booming, and every shipment carries not only millions in profit, but also layers of risk. A single slip, a wrong delivery, a careless conversation, a bribe gone wrong, could expose entire supply lines, and Ignacio knows the authorities are hunting harder than ever. Just the previous month, federal soldiers had raided a lab near Tepetitlan, seizing over a ton of finished product. They hadn't caught anyone high level, but Ignacio recognized the message. They were closing in. That evening, he drives, not in his usual armored SUV, but in a low-profile sedan, to a modest house on the outskirts of the city where Jesus is waiting. The neighborhood is quiet, middle class, with small shops and children riding bicycles along cracked sidewalks. Ignacio doesn't like coming here. It makes him feel too visible. But family has a way of drawing you out of your comfort zone. Jesus greets him nervously, ushering him inside where the smell of cooking oil and laundry soap fills the small living room. Ignacio sits on a worn couch, studying the young man's restless hands. "I'm hearing things." Ignacio begins softly. "I want to hear your side before I decide how serious they are." Jesus swallows hard. "Tio, I swear I haven't talked to anyone I shouldn't," he blurts. "The others don't like me because I'm new, because I ask questions. That's all." Ignacio watches his eyes as he speaks. There's fear there, yes, but also a kind of naive sincerity. He considers his next words carefully. "Your family," he says finally. "That protects you for now. But you must understand, loyalty is not optional. It's life or death. And not just for you." Jesus nods vigorously, promising to be more cautious. Ignacio stands, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Don't make me choose between you and the organization," he says quietly. "I don't want to, but I will if I have to." Back at the ranch house later, Ramon and Tacho are waiting for his verdict. "He's scared enough to behave," Ignacio tells them, "but keep an eye on him. If you notice even one sign of disloyalty, you come straight to me." It's a difficult balance to strike, protecting family while maintaining the iron discipline that keeps his network intact. He knows his lieutenants expect him to act ruthlessly if necessary. They've seen too many leaders fall because they hesitated. Many people still think that blood ties make men stronger, but in Ignacio's world, they can be the very thing that gets you killed. So what do you think? Would you trust family in a business like this? The night deepens over Guadalajara. The air thick with the distant thump of bass from neighborhood parties and the occasional pop of fireworks, or maybe gunfire. Ignacio steps out into the courtyard, the gravel crunching under his polished shoes, and lights a cigarette. He exhales slowly, watching the smoke rise and dissipate into the warm darkness. He feels the weight of the day pressing down on him, the uncertainty about Jesus, the growing tension with rivals, the constant threat of raids. Still, there's a strange comfort in knowing he's survived this long. He's outlasted enemies who thought they could erase him, dodged federal operations planned for months, and built a fortune so vast it's hard even for him to calculate. Yet he can't shake the feeling that something is shifting beneath the surface, subtle but inexorable, like the first tremors before an earthquake. A guard approaches quietly, murmuring that tomorrow's convoy is ready for inspection. Ignacio flicks the cigarette into the gravel and nods. "Get some rest," he tells the man. "Tomorrow will be busy." As he heads inside, locking the heavy wooden door behind him, he wonders how many more days like this he can expect. The world he's built feels solid, but he knows better than anyone how quickly that illusion can crumble. The next morning, the sun lifts over Guadalajara's skyline, casting a golden haze over the sprawling city, as Ignacio Coronel Villarreal sits at the edge of the same oak desk, tracing lines with his finger across a map of the northern border. This is where the empire stretches long and thin, his crystal meth shipments passing through a network of drivers, corrupt customs agents, and tunnels so ingeniously hidden that even the most determined federal investigator would need a miracle to find them. He knows this game well, yet it's always evolving, each day bringing a new wrinkle to unfold, a new danger to anticipate. Ramon enters the office quietly, carrying a folder stuffed with reports. Ignacio doesn't look up, merely gestures for him to leave it on the desk. "Numbers," Ramon says softly. 2 more shipments made it through Texas without a scratch. One was heavier than expected, 20% over projection. Ignacio raises an eyebrow. "Who authorized the increase?" "Tacho," Ramon replies. "He thought it was worth the risk." Ignacio exhales slowly, leaning back in the chair. "He's not wrong," he mutters. "But the more we press the weight, the more we tempt scrutiny. Customs might be lazy most days, but even a sleeping dog wakes when you step on its tail. The truth is, the routes into the United States are the lifeblood of his operation. Without them, all the carefully calibrated production in Jalisco's hills means nothing. He's invested years perfecting this machine, creating redundancies, backup drivers, safe houses spaced across highways from Nuevo Laredo to Arizona. Each shipment is like a pulse through the arteries of his network, and he can feel it instinctively, whether something's off or running smooth. By mid-morning, he's standing in the cavernous warehouse again, inspecting a line of trucks parked under fluorescent lights. Workers move efficiently, loading boxes marked as legitimate goods. Tiles, farm equipment, even children's toys. Inside, however, each box is lined with compartments of carefully wrapped crystalline methamphetamine. Ignacio examines one of the trucks closely, running his hand along the hidden seams. "Good," he says quietly. "Keep it tight. If they can find it in under an hour, you've failed." As he moves through the warehouse, Tacho meets him with updates about U.S. demand. "The street price is holding," Tacho says, flipping open a ledger. "We're making more on each kilo than last quarter, but the buyers in Chicago and Atlanta are pushing for faster turnaround. They're nervous. Too many rumors about federal heat." Ignacio nods. "They'll wait," he says simply. "A few extra days won't kill them, and rushing kills us." It's not an exaggeration. He knows that every border crossing is a coin toss, even with bribes paid and routes meticulously planned. One random inspection, one new officer with a chip on his shoulder, and the entire chain could collapse. He doesn't like living with that level of uncertainty, but it's the nature of the business. Later that day, Ignacio convenes his lieutenants in a secure room deep inside one of his properties. The men sit at a long table, faces lit only by the pale glow of overhead lights. He points to the map pinned on the wall, tracing routes northward. "We'll continue sending through Texas," he explains, "but I want a parallel path through California. Too much pressure in one state, and they'll crack us open. Diversify the routes." Ramon raises a hand. "California's ports are better monitored. More technology, more dogs." Ignacio smirks faintly. "Then we'll innovate. We've done it before. Do you remember the first time we used the refrigerated trucks? Everyone said it wouldn't work. The men chuckle softly, but Ignacio's expression remains serious. We can't afford complacency, he continues. Rivals are watching. Authorities are watching. If we stand still, we're done. There's a pause as the weight of his words settles over the table. Ignacio's mind drifts briefly to El Chapo and El Mayo, the other power centers of the Sinaloa Federation. He knows they're counting on his crystal operations to keep cash flowing, and if he falters, they'll have no reason to protect him. Alliances in this world are like sand dunes. They shift with the wind. That night, Ignacio reviews his finances alone. The numbers are staggering, even for him. Tens of millions moving through shell companies and offshore accounts, cash so plentiful that some of it is literally rotting in hidden stash houses. He's built this empire with meticulous care, and yet it feels fragile. One raid, one betrayal, and everything could vanish overnight. As he sits there, the phone buzzes. It's a secure line, and only a handful of people know the number. He answers, and a soft voice tells him that one of the smaller labs in Michoacan has gone dark. No deliveries, no communications. Ignacio's jaw tightens. Send scouts, he orders. If it's the army, I want to know how close they are. If it's a rival, I want names. He hangs up and stares out the window at the glittering city lights. He remembers when he used to dream about Guadalajara as a teenager, thinking it was the city where anything was possible. Now he knows better. Every dream here carries a cost, and the price only grows steeper the higher you climb. Many people still think that Ignacio Coronel is the safest man in Guadalajara, untouchable because of his wealth and connections. But he feels the walls tightening. So, what do you think? He whispers into the empty room, as if someone could answer. Can a man like me ever really win? The night stretches on, the hum of distant traffic mixing with the occasional bark of a stray dog. Ignacio closes the ledger, locks it in a safe, and pours himself a glass of tequila. He takes a slow sip, savoring the burn, and then sets the glass down carefully. There's work to do, more than he can count, and less time than he'd like to do it. The morning sun presses heavily through the tinted windows of Ignacio Coronel Villarreal's SUV as he rides silently toward the foothills of Jalisco. Dust kicks up behind the convoy of black vehicles, the kind of sight that makes locals turn away and pretend they didn't see anything. Ignacio doesn't speak for most of the trip. He's thinking about the call he received the night before, the lab in Michoacan that's gone dark. He suspects a raid, and if that's true, the ripple effects could shatter more than just his profits. They arrive at a secluded site several miles off the main road, a disguised agricultural warehouse surrounded by cornfields. Ignacio steps out into the heat, adjusting his sunglasses as a small group of men approach. Their leader, a wiry figure named Martin, greets him nervously. Senor Coronel, we checked the lab. It's gone. Soldiers burned it down 2 days ago. No survivors, at least not on our side. Ignacio's jaw tightens. He doesn't raise his voice. He never does. Instead, he asks, how did they find it? Who talked? Martin hesitates, glancing at the men behind him. We don't know. But it was too clean, too fast. They knew exactly where to go. Ignacio nods slowly, the weight of the information settling over him like a lead blanket. It's not just the loss of product that bothers him. It's the precision. He's been in this business long enough to recognize when someone is feeding the authorities information. That means a leak, and leaks are fatal. And leaks. Back in the SUV, he calls Ramon. I want every lab commander questioned, quietly. and no one moves shipments until I say so. Ramon's voice on the other end is taut with worry. Understood. What if it was an inside job? Ignacio exhales slowly. Then we'll find the rat, and we'll make an example of him. Later that day, he gathers his lieutenants at the ranch house. The atmosphere is tense as he outlines the situation. This isn't random, he tells them. They knew where to hit, and they hit hard. That means someone close to us is talking. I want full audits of everyone's communications. Every man, every connection. If anyone is living above their means, I want to know about it. Tacho shifts uneasily. What about Jesus? You warned him once already. If he's the leak, Ignacio cuts him off with a sharp look. We'll handle family separately. Don't assume anything until we know for sure. But privately, Ignacio can't ignore the thought. He'd seen the fear in Jesus' eyes when he'd confronted him a few days ago. Was it fear of disappointing his uncle, or fear of being caught? That evening, Ignacio drives out alone, something he rarely does. He needs space to think. The roads wind through the outskirts of Guadalajara, lined with small farms and crumbling houses. The smell of burning trash drifts through the open window. He remembers the first time he ever cooked meth in a makeshift lab years ago. It was crude, dangerous, and it barely produced enough product to matter. But the profit was undeniable, and it fueled a rapid ascent from small-time operator to one of the most powerful men in the Sinaloa Federation. Now, all that power feels like a cage. He's constantly surrounded by guards, yet the danger grows closer every day. Many people still think that the Mexican army can't touch men like Ignacio, that his money and influence make him immune. But he knows better. He's seen others, Arturo Beltran Leyva among them, fall in spectacular fashion when the government decides it needs a victory. So what do you think? Can even a man at the top of the chain truly outlast the full weight of the state? When Ignacio returns to the ranch, Ramon is waiting with news. We've confirmed it was the army, Ramon says. They moved fast, and they had helicopters. But there's more. We intercepted a communication between one of our drivers and a cousin in the police. He's been making side deals. Ignacio closes his eyes for a moment, weighing the implications. Bring him in, he says finally. Alive. I want to hear from his mouth who he's been talking to. The following night, the driver is dragged into a secure room at one of Ignacio's properties. He's a young man, barely in his 20s, trembling as Ignacio steps into the room. You were careless, Ignacio says softly. And now, soldiers are burning down everything we've built. The driver swears he never intended harm. He just needed extra money and thought sharing minor details with a cousin would do no damage. But Ignacio knows better. Even small leaks can sink ships, and this one has already cost him dearly. What happens next is methodical, cold. Ignacio doesn't raise his voice or make threats. He simply explains the reality. The driver has endangered everyone, and there's only one way this ends. The men in the room understand without further instruction. Afterward, Ignacio steps outside into the night air. He doesn't feel relief, only the faintest sense of control restored. He knows there will be more raids, more betrayals. The war never really stops. It just shifts terrain. He calls Tacho before heading home. Double security at every lab, Ignacio orders. And cut production at any site that feels exposed. I'd rather take a loss than hand them another easy win. The phone clicks off, and Ignacio looks out at the distant lights of Guadalajara, flickering like embers in the darkness. He feels the weight of the city pressing on him, its noise and chaos barely held back by the walls of his empire. Tomorrow, he'll have to make bigger moves, shift routes, silence more leaks, reassure the Sinaloa Federation that his crystal trade is still unshakable. But tonight, he just stands there, listening to the distant hum of traffic and wondering how many more fires he'll have to put out before one finally consumes him entirely. The next morning in Guadalajara begins with the muted sound of a city that never truly sleeps. Street vendors call out, traffic horns echo, and Ignacio Coronel Villarreal sits motionless at his dining table with a coffee cup cooling in front of him. He hasn't touched it. News arrived overnight. A trusted lieutenant named Hector, one of the original architects of his distribution network, was ambushed and killed in his own driveway. The details are chilling. 2 vehicles boxed in Hector's SUV as he left his gated neighborhood, and gunmen opened fire with rifles before fleeing without a word. No robbery, no ransom note, just precision. Ignacio absorbs the information quietly, but the room feels colder. Hector was more than a soldier. He was someone Ignacio had trusted with sensitive shipments and access to stash houses. How many times did he ride in my car? Ignacio thinks as he sets the untouched coffee aside. How many conversations did he hear? Ramon steps into the room, expression grim. We've already sealed off the houses Hector had keys to, he reports. But the men are nervous. Some think the Beltran Leyva crew was behind it. Others think the army set him up. Ignacio nods, though the wheels in his mind spin faster than his words. Maybe it was neither, he says. Maybe someone wanted him gone for another reason. The suggestion hangs heavy. Inside this organization, loyalties are tested constantly, and ambition can twist even long-standing alliances into something lethal. That afternoon, Ignacio convenes a meeting at one of his safe houses. The lieutenants gather around the long table again, the mood dark. Tacho slams a fist onto the polished surface. We can't let this stand. Whoever hit Hector is sending a message. If we don't answer, we look weak. Ignacio doesn't respond immediately. He understands the instinct to strike back, but he's not willing to swing blindly. If we retaliate without knowing who's behind it, we risk a war we can't win, he says finally. This isn't about looking strong. It's about staying alive. A younger lieutenant named Mauro bristles at that. And how many more of us have to die while we stay alive? He asks, voice tight. Ignacio's gaze fixes on Mauro until the younger man looks away. None, Ignacio says calmly. But the wrong move will kill more of us than any ambush ever could. Do you remember what happened to Arturo Beltran Leyva when he overplayed his hand? I won't die in a hail of bullets for someone else's pride. The room falls silent. Later, Ignacio retreats to his office, the walls lined with maps and ledgers. He pulls a stack of surveillance reports from a locked drawer and studies them in detail. Some of the photographs show unmarked vehicles parked near his warehouses. Others depict soldiers moving through the outskirts of Guadalajara. Each image feels like another crack in the walls around him, but it's the photo of Hector's body that lingers longest. Ignacio can see the way his lieutenant's hands are curled at his sides, as if he knew what was coming, but didn't have time to fight. That night, he sits alone on the balcony of his main residence. The city sprawls below like a restless animal, glowing and shifting with its own rhythm. Ignacio lights a cigarette, inhales deeply, and lets the smoke curl into the warm air. Many people still think that the Crystal King has no weak spots, that his network is so tight-knit, it's immune to the fractures that bring down lesser cartels. But Ignacio knows better. He can feel the fault lines widening under his feet, and the death of a lieutenant as vital as Hector is a tremor that could become an earthquake. So what do you think? Can a structure built on fear and loyalty survive when fear outweighs the loyalty? He flicks ash from the cigarette and takes out his phone. Double the shadow teams, he tells Ramon. I want eyes on every rival we know. If anyone makes a move, we'll know before they do. The call ends, but the unease doesn't fade. Ignacio's mind drifts back to Jesus, his nephew. He can't shake the feeling that the younger man's unease is more than just nerves. But is it possible that family could have had a hand in Hector's death? The idea gnaws at him as the night deepens. He remembers how Hector had vouched for Jesus when he first joined the organization. If Hector suspected the boy was leaking information, could someone inside the family have decided to eliminate him before he could speak? Ignacio exhales slowly, the glowing ember of his cigarette shrinking with each breath. He knows the only way forward is to tighten his grip. Trust fewer people. Question everyone. The following day, he calls a closed-door meeting with Tacho and Ramon. No one is safe from suspicion now, he tells them. If we find one more traitor, we act immediately. No hesitation. The two men nod, but Ignacio can see the unease in their eyes. Fear has begun to seep into the room, into every whispered conversation and every sideways glance. He knows that's dangerous. Fear keeps people loyal, but it can also make them unpredictable. As he watches the guards secure the property that night, Ignacio feels the tension building like static before a storm. The ambush on Hector isn't an isolated incident. It's a warning shot, and Ignacio Coronel Villarreal is not a man who ignores warnings. The following days in Guadalajara move with a grim, deliberate rhythm as Ignacio Coronel Villarreal tightens his grip on the organization. Every phone call is scrutinized, every shipment rerouted, every man reminded that even minor mistakes could cost them their lives. Fear hangs in the air like smog, thick and choking. Ignacio sits in his office at the ranch, his sharp eyes scanning the maps and ledgers before him. There is no room for distraction. The death of Hector still stings, not only as a loss of a trusted lieutenant, but also as a sign of deeper fractures. He knows that the Sinaloa Federation, El Chapo and El Mayo included, are watching his every move now, waiting to see if he falters. That afternoon, Ramon arrives with news. The Federation is asking questions, he says, keeping his voice low. They're nervous about the raids. They think you're losing control of Guadalajara. Ignacio closes the ledger with a sharp snap. Of course they're nervous, he says. They're losing money every time the army burns one of my labs. But I'm not losing control. I'm adapting. Ramon hesitates. They don't see it that way. There are whispers that maybe you're no longer as reliable as you once were. Ignacio's jaw tightens. He knows how quickly those whispers can turn into accusations, and accusations can be fatal. The Beltran Leyva brothers had learned that lesson the hard way after being accused of working with authorities. It had taken only a hint of disloyalty for the Federation to sever ties and set them on a path to war. Set up a meeting, Ignacio says finally. I'll talk to Chapo and Mayo myself. They need to hear from me directly before they start believing their own paranoia. The meeting is arranged in a remote compound tucked deep into the mountains, accessible only by winding dirt roads. Ignacio arrives with a small security detail, the convoy climbing higher until the city is nothing but a faint glow on the horizon. Inside the compound, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is waiting, his stocky frame and restless energy filling the room. Ismael El Mayo Zambada sits beside him, older and more measured, his calm demeanor masking the steel beneath. El Chapo wastes no time. "We're losing shipments, Nacho," he says bluntly. "The army is cracking down hard, and your labs are the ones getting hit." "That's not coincidence." Ignacio meets his gaze without flinching. "I'm aware," he replies evenly. "And I'm already making adjustments. But understand this. No one can produce crystal at the level we do. You cut me out, and you cut your own revenue in half." Mayo leans forward, his voice softer but no less pointed. "We're not talking about cutting anyone out. We're talking about trust. We need to know you have this under control." Ignacio's tone remains calm, but there's a subtle edge to it. "I do. The raids were coordinated, yes, but we've already plugged the leak. Security is tighter now than it's ever been. If the army wants another win, they'll have to work harder for it." Chapo studies him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Fine," he says, "but you'd better be right. If Guadalajara falls, we all fall." The meeting concludes with an uneasy handshake. Ignacio leaves the compound feeling the weight of their words pressing on his shoulders. He knows the Federation's patience is limited. If he slips even once more, they'll decide he's a liability. And in this world, liabilities are eliminated. Back in Guadalajara, Ignacio calls Tacho and Ramon together. "We're doubling our network in California," he tells them. "Texas is too hot now. We'll also start moving smaller shipments more frequently instead of larger ones. Less profit per load, but harder for the army to track." Tacho frowns. "That will slow everything down." "Better slow than dead," Ignacio snaps, then softens his voice. "We can't give them another easy target. This is how we survive." Later that evening, Ignacio retreats to his private quarters. He sits on the balcony with a glass of tequila, staring out at the city lights. He remembers how, years ago, he had envisioned Guadalajara as a fortress, a place where he could build something unshakable. Now it feels like the walls are closing in, piece by piece. Many people still think that Ignacio Coronel is untouchable, the kind of man who can slip through any trap. But the truth is different. He can feel the net tightening, and for the first time in years, a flicker of doubt creeps in. So what do you think? Can a man hold on to an empire when even his allies start to doubt him? He finishes the drink and sets the glass down carefully, his mind already turning to the next moves. New hideouts, fresh bribes, shifting alliances. In this world, hesitation is death, and Ignacio Coronel Villarreal has no intention of dying quietly. The meeting with El Chapo and El Mayo lingers in Ignacio Coronel Villarreal's mind for days, like a thorn he can't quite pull out. The tone of their words, the way Chapo's restless energy radiated a kind of barely veiled impatience, and Mayo's measured warnings, they all pointed to a dangerous truth. His allies in the Sinaloa Federation were losing faith. Ignacio spends the following week reconfiguring everything. Convoys are split into smaller caravans, new drivers are rotated in, and warehouses are shuffled with almost obsessive precision. He even instructs Ramon and Tacho to start moving some shipments, using routes that bypass Guadalajara entirely, just to reduce visibility. If they can't find us, they can't burn us, he says. But the tension in his voice betrays the stakes. It's late one night when Ignacio receives word of a potential betrayal in one of his outer circles. A lower-level distributor was spotted meeting privately with a man tied to the Beltran Leyva faction. Ignacio doesn't immediately react. He simply signals for Ramon to bring the distributor in quietly. Hours later, the man sits across from Ignacio in a dimly lit room. Sweat rolls down his temples as Ignacio leans forward, his tone deceptively soft. "You know what happens to people who talk to rivals, don't you?" "I wasn't talking," the man stammers. "I swear, Senor Coronel, it was personal. My cousin. He's with them, but we weren't." Ignacio holds up a hand. "You think they care about family ties? They see you, they see me. And I don't tolerate leaks, no matter the excuse." He doesn't need to raise his voice. The silence that follows is louder than any threat. When the man is led away, Ignacio feels a pang of something. Regret, maybe. But it's fleeting. In this world, mercy is an invitation for more betrayal. The following morning, Ignacio calls for a strategy meeting. Tacho is already pacing when Ignacio arrives, and Ramon is scanning a list of names, muttering under his breath. "Too many holes," Ramon says grimly. "We can't keep plugging them fast enough." Ignacio studies the list. "We don't have to plug them all," he says. "We just have to close the ones that matter." Tacho stops pacing. "And how do we know which ones matter?" "We watch," Ignacio replies. "We wait, and when someone makes a mistake, we act fast." The conversation is interrupted by a phone call. Ignacio listens intently, his jaw tightening as the voice on the other end explains that yet another stash house has been raided, this time in the outskirts of Tepic. The soldiers seized a significant quantity of meth, along with cash and weapons. Tacho curses under his breath. "It's like they're reading our playbook," he says. Ignacio doesn't answer immediately. He knows the implications. Someone with inside knowledge is feeding information to the army, maybe even the DEA. The raids are too precise, too well timed to be random. That night, Ignacio makes a decision. He will meet El Chapo and El Mayo again, this time not to reassure them, but to demand answers. If someone inside the Federation is setting him up, he needs to know. The meeting takes place in another secluded compound, deeper into the Sierra Madre Mountains. Chapo arrives first, his usual swagger dampened by a flash of irritation. "You're burning through labs, Nacho," he says. "That makes everyone nervous." Ignacio doesn't flinch. "And I'm supposed to believe it's just bad luck?" he asks. "Someone is feeding information to the army, and if it's not one of my men, then maybe it's one of yours." Chapo's eyes narrow, but he doesn't deny it. "Careful," he warns. "We're all under pressure. If you start accusing people, you'll find yourself very alone." Mayo intervenes before the tension can escalate further. "This isn't the time for blame," he says evenly. "But, Ignacio, you need to fix this. If Guadalajara becomes a liability, we can't protect you." Ignacio nods, though inside he feels the chill of isolation creeping in. The Federation is hedging its bets, and if they decide to cut him loose, he'll be left exposed to enemies on all sides. As he drives back to Guadalajara through the winding mountain roads, Ignacio reflects on how fragile his position has become. Many people still think that the alliances in the Sinaloa Federation are unbreakable, forged in mutual trust and shared profit. But Ignacio knows the truth. Alliances are only as strong as the money they generate, and right now, his losses are making him look weak. So what do you think? Can a man survive when even his partners start sharpening their knives? Back in the city, Ignacio orders the immediate relocation of his family to multiple safe houses. He doesn't want all his loved ones in one place. It's too dangerous. He tells them it's temporary, but the look in his eyes says otherwise. That night, Ignacio sits alone in his study, the city's neon glow filtering faintly through the curtains. He pours himself a drink and stares at the maps on the wall. Guadalajara has always been his kingdom, but now it feels like a trap closing tighter with every passing day. He makes one final call before the night ends, instructing Ramon and Tacho to prepare for a significant change in operations. "If they think I'm cornered," he says quietly, "then it's time to remind them who they're dealing with." The following morning dawns warm and bright over Guadalajara, though Ignacio Coronel Villarreal barely notices the sunshine streaming through the curtained windows of his safe house. He's already up, dressed in his usual muted attire, boots polished and shirt crisp. The routine gives him a sense of control, even when everything else feels precarious. Today's task is one he doesn't relish, moving his family into safer locations. He knows this won't go over smoothly. Some of his relatives, especially the younger ones, have grown accustomed to the comforts of Guadalajara. They see themselves as untouchable by association, believing the layers of security around Ignacio will protect them forever. Ignacio, however, knows better. He's seen too many wives, nephews, and cousins used as leverage in wars like this, snatched from their homes or killed outright to send a message. Ramon and Tacho coordinate the operation quietly. 4 different convoys will move at staggered intervals throughout the day, each taking a different route to a separate location. These safe houses are scattered across Jalisco and neighboring states, places so secluded they might as well be ghost towns. Jesus, Ignacio's nephew, is the first to voice his displeasure when Ignacio breaks the news. "Tio, this is unnecessary," he protests, his youthful bravado edging into disrespect. "Nobody's coming after us. They want you, not the family." Ignacio fixes him with a look that could freeze water. "That's exactly why you're leaving," he says evenly. "If they can't reach me, they'll reach for the people I care about, and I'm not giving them that advantage." Jesus shifts uncomfortably, muttering under his breath. Ignacio ignores it. He's learned not to argue with emotion. Instead, he lets the silence do the talking. As the family is dispersed throughout the day, Ignacio checks in at each departure point. Mothers clutch small children. Older relatives carry bags stuffed hastily with clothes and personal items. The atmosphere is tense, and though Ignacio offers words of reassurance, he knows they see the worry etched into his face. By the time the final convoy leaves, the sun is dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Ignacio stands alone in the courtyard of the now empty residence, the sounds of Guadalajara's bustling streets seeming louder without the comfort of family nearby. He retreats to his study, where Ramon is waiting with updates. "They're all settled," Ramon says quietly. "Each house has a full security detail, and the locations are known only to us." "Good," Ignacio replies, though the hollow feeling in his chest lingers. He's always been close to his family, but the reality of his world has made proximity dangerous. Protecting them means keeping them at a distance. The conversation turns to business. Tacho arrives with intelligence on rival movements. Small cells tied to the Beltran Leyva faction have been spotted closer to Guadalajara, probing the edges of Ignacio's territory. "They're testing us," Tacho says, looking for weak spots. Ignacio studies the map on the table, tracing his finger along the highways leading into the city. "We'll give them nothing," he says firmly. "Increase patrols. Rotate the men more often so they don't get predictable. If anyone steps over the line, deal with them quietly." That night, Ignacio walks the perimeter of his property alone. The crickets chirp in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. He thinks of his family scattered across hidden houses, wonders if they're afraid or angry or both. He knows they don't fully understand the stakes. Many people still think that being close to a powerful man like Ignacio is a form of protection, a shield against danger. But Ignacio knows it can just as easily make you a target. So, what do you think? Would you want to be part of a world where your safety depends entirely on someone else's enemies staying distracted? Later, Ignacio steps inside and checks his phone. There's a message from El Mayo, subtle but clear. Pressure from the government is increasing. Be careful. Ignacio understands the subtext. The Federation can only shield him for so long before they decide it's easier to cut ties. The weight of it all presses on him as he pours a glass of tequila and sits by the window. He remembers the early years when life felt simpler, when ambition and adrenaline fueled him rather than fear. Now, every decision carries the potential to unravel everything he's built. He closes his eyes briefly, listening to the hum of distant traffic, and allows himself a moment of stillness. But the moment is short-lived. His phone buzzes again. Another message, this one from Ramon. We may have a lead on the leak. It reads, need to discuss in person. Ignacio sets the glass down and straightens his shoulders. The walls may be closing in, but he refuses to go quietly. If someone inside his circle is betraying him, they'll soon learn just how dangerous it is to cross the Crystal King of Guadalajara. The next morning, Ignacio Coronel Villarreal is already awake before dawn, seated at the long dining table in one of his safe houses. The room is quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of a clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the adjoining kitchen. He's thinking about the message from Ramon the night before, the lead on the leak, and the possibilities it might uncover. By the time Ramon and Tacho arrive, Ignacio has already rehearsed the questions he plans to ask. They enter without fanfare, their expressions taut, carrying a folder thick with surveillance reports and financial ledgers. We've been tracking money, Ramon begins, sliding the folder toward Ignacio. Small transfers at first, then bigger ones. One of our shell businesses, a trucking company out of Colima, has been bleeding cash in amounts that don't make sense. And the trail leads to one of our accountants, Ernesto. Ignacio flips through the documents. The numbers tell a story even Ernesto's smoothest excuses couldn't hide. The accountant has been quietly siphoning money, moving it into accounts that, on closer inspection, connect to a cousin in law enforcement. Tacho leans forward, voice low. We think Ernesto is our leak. He's been feeding information to the police for months, maybe longer. Every lab raid, every stash house burned, it lines up with his access. Ignacio shuts the folder with deliberate calm. Bring him to me, he says. 2 hours later, Ernesto sits in the same chair that others before him have occupied, sweat dampening the collar of his crisp white shirt. Ignacio's voice is soft, almost sympathetic as he asks, "How long have you been stealing from me?" Ernesto's denials come quickly, but Ignacio doesn't press. He simply waits, letting the silence gnaw at the accountant's nerves. Eventually, Ernesto's composure breaks, and the words spill out. A bribe here, a favor there, and finally a deal with authorities who promised him safety if he cooperated. Safety, Ignacio repeats, the faintest trace of a smile touching his lips. They can't even keep themselves safe, and you thought they could protect you? Ernesto's pleas for mercy fall on deaf ears. Ignacio understands that leniency now would send the wrong message. one that could fracture what remains of his already strained organization. When the room falls quiet again, Ernesto is escorted out, and Ignacio feels no satisfaction, only the heavy inevitability of what had to be done. Later, Ignacio calls a meeting with Ramon and Tacho to discuss the fallout. "We've plugged one leak," he says, "but we don't know how deep the damage goes. If the army has Ernesto's information, we should assume they know about every major account and property he touched." Tacho nods grimly. "We'll start liquidating assets tied to those accounts. Move the cash to places no one expects." Ignacio agrees. "Do it quickly and quietly. We can't show panic, but we also can't afford another hit." That evening, Ignacio sits alone in his study, going through the stacks of ledgers Ernesto once managed. Each page feels like a reminder of how fragile his empire really is, built on trust that can evaporate with a single betrayal. Many people still think that a man like Ignacio can absorb any blow and keep going, that money and connections make him invincible. But the truth is more complicated. One disloyal accountant can undo years of careful planning. So, what do you think? Would you sleep easily knowing that one mistake by someone else could collapse everything you've built? As the night deepens, Ignacio pours himself a drink and calls his family's safe houses, one by one, checking in with each relative. He can hear the unease in their voices. The forced relocations have left them unsettled, and though they don't say it outright, Ignacio senses their resentment building. He ends the calls with brief reassurances, then leans back in his chair, staring at the maps of Guadalajara pinned to the wall. He knows he needs to regain momentum, to show both his allies and enemies that he's still in control. The next day, he gathers his lieutenants at a heavily guarded warehouse. "From now on," he tells them, "we tighten the network even further. Fewer people know the details of each shipment. If anyone asks questions they shouldn't, remove them immediately. We're done giving second chances." Ramon glances at Tacho before speaking. "That will breed fear," he warns. "Good," Ignacio replies. "Fear keeps people quiet." As the men disperse, Ignacio steps outside, breathing in the heavy air of Guadalajara. He knows the walls are still closing in, but for the first time in weeks, he feels a sliver of clarity. The empire can only survive if he makes it unbreakable from the inside out, even if it means ruling with absolute ruthlessness. The first light of dawn creeps over Guadalajara, casting a faint glow through the windows of Ignacio Coronel Villarreal's safe house. He's already awake, his phone in hand, scanning encrypted messages from his network. Each update feels like a small battle won or lost. A shipment crossing the border undetected, a stash house successfully relocated, a suspicious vehicle spotted near one of their warehouses. Ignacio absorbs the information methodically, setting the phone down only when Ramon steps into the room. "The DEA is tightening its net," Ramon says without preamble. "We intercepted chatter last night. They're tracking our shipments more aggressively than ever. They've got new informants inside Mexico." Ignacio leans back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Of course they do," he mutters. "They've been patient, letting the army make the first moves. Now they're stepping in." Tacho arrives moments later, his broad frame filling the doorway. "It's not just the DEA," he says. "The federales are coordinating raids with them. We've seen joint teams on the highways. This isn't business as usual, Ignacio. They're coming for you." Ignacio's voice is calm, but the weight behind it is unmistakable. "Then we have to stay 3 steps ahead." He walks to the large map on the wall, tracing the primary shipment routes with his finger. "We'll reduce the volume going through each route by 30%. Make it harder to justify large-scale checkpoints. And every driver we use from now on will be vetted twice. No more shortcuts." Ramon frowns. That slows us down. Profits will drop. Better profits drop than we all end up in handcuffs, Ignacio says sharply. Then, softening slightly, he adds, "This is temporary. We'll adapt faster than they can. That's how we survive." Later that morning, Ignacio meets with a small group of trusted couriers at a secure warehouse. He walks the length of the loading docks, inspecting the trucks that will soon cross into the United States. Hidden compartments line each vehicle, designed to outsmart the most advanced scanning technology. But Ignacio knows no method is foolproof. He gathers the couriers and speaks with quiet authority. "You'll be questioned more often now. You may even be arrested. But if you stay disciplined, we'll get through this. If anyone breaks under pressure..." He pauses, letting the silence fill in the threat. You know what happens. As the couriers nod nervously, Ignacio's phone vibrates. It's a secure call from an ally inside the federal police. The man's voice is strained. "They're focusing on Guadalajara now. Too many of your shipments have slipped past them. They're angry." Ignacio absorbs the information with a slight nod. "Thank you," he says, ending the call. He doesn't mention the name of his contact. Even Ramon and Tacho don't know. Protecting his sources is paramount. That evening, Ignacio meets with his lieutenants in a dimly lit room. The air is heavy with tension as they discuss the escalating pressure from authorities. "We can't keep dodging them forever," Tacho says. "Sooner or later they'll hit something we can't move in time." Ignacio studies the men around the table. "Then we change the game," he says. "We've been reactive for too long. It's time to mislead them, feed them false information, and make them chase ghosts. We'll plant evidence that sends them to empty warehouses, decoys that waste their resources." Ramon nods slowly. "That buys us time. But what about the DEA's informants? They're the real problem." Ignacio's gaze hardens. "We'll find them, and when we do, they'll disappear." As the meeting ends, Ignacio steps outside, the cool night air brushing against his face. The city below hums with life. Cars weaving through traffic, distant music drifting from open windows. He wonders how many of the people out there have any idea of the shadow war unfolding in their streets. Many people still think that law enforcement is an unstoppable force, always a step ahead, always closing in. But Ignacio knows the truth is far messier. The DEA's net may be tightening, but it's filled with holes. "So, what do you think?" he murmurs softly. "Can they really catch a ghost they can't see?" Back inside, Ignacio checks in with the family safe houses once again. He asks after the children first, then the elders, keeping his voice calm, even as he hears the anxiety in theirs. He knows the relocations have taken a toll, but he also knows they're safer away from Guadalajara's mounting pressure. Later, in the solitude of his study, Ignacio pours himself a drink and stares at the ledger Ernesto once managed. He's already shifted millions to offshore accounts, knowing the government could freeze domestic assets at any moment. Each line on the page represents a layer of security, but even he can feel how precarious it all is. As the clock ticks past midnight, Ignacio sets the drink down and picks up the phone. There's a man in California he trusts, an old contact who can help build alternate supply lines outside Mexico. "I'm ready to expand," Ignacio says when the man answers. "But we do it quietly. No mistakes." The call ends, and Ignacio leans back, his expression unreadable. He knows the coming weeks will define everything. One wrong move could bring his empire crashing down, but one right move could buy him the time he needs to strengthen his hold. He finishes the last sip of tequila and whispers to himself, "We'll see who moves first." The following week dawns humid and heavy over Guadalajara. as if the air itself senses the tension building in Ignacio Coronel Villarreal's world. He's seated at a long mahogany table in one of his less conspicuous residences, flipping through reports brought by Ramon. His expression is unreadable, but the occasional tap of his finger against the polished wood betrays his impatience. "These younger lieutenants are restless," Ramon says carefully. "They're questioning your strategy. Some think we're shrinking instead of growing." Ignacio doesn't look up. "We're surviving," he corrects calmly. "Anyone who can't tell the difference doesn't belong here." Tacho, leaning against the wall, adds, "Mauro's the loudest. He's telling the others we should hit back harder at the Federales and the Beltran Leyva crew." He's itching for violence. Ignacio finally lifts his eyes, and the room goes quiet. "Mauro is ambitious," he says, voice steady. "Ambition can be useful, until it isn't. Keep him close and feed him just enough responsibility to keep him busy. I want eyes on every conversation he has." He's been in this position before. Ambitious lieutenants can become invaluable assets if managed correctly, but they can also become dangerous liabilities. Ignacio's empire has lasted because he knows when to reward and when to cull, and he senses Mauro is inching toward that dangerous tipping point. Later that afternoon, Ignacio convenes a meeting with his broader inner circle at a discreet property on Guadalajara's edge. The men gather around the table, shifting uncomfortably as Ignacio addresses them. "You're worried," he begins without preamble. "I understand that. We've taken losses and the authorities are closing in. But this is not the time for panic. Panic gets you killed. Mauro can't help himself." "With respect, Senor Coronel," he says, leaning forward. "Some of us think we should be more aggressive. Send a message that we won't be hunted. Sitting back makes us look weak." Ignacio studies him for a long moment, and Mauro's bravado falters. "Do you think Arturo Beltran Leyva looked weak when he started firing at soldiers in Cuernavaca?" Ignacio asks quietly. "He was dead a week later. Do you want to end up like him?" The silence that follows is answer enough. He dismisses the group with instructions to stay alert and avoid unnecessary risks. But as the men file out, Ignacio catches Ramon's eye and nods toward Mauro. "Keep him close," he murmurs. "I want to know what he's planning before he even thinks it." That evening, Ignacio retreats to his private quarters, where the noise of the city seems distant, almost unreal. He pours himself a drink and stares at the glowing lights outside. He knows his organization is under strain, not just from the raids and the betrayals, but from within. Fear can unify, but it can also fracture. Many people still think that leadership in the cartel world is about brute force, about making examples of those who defy you. But Ignacio knows the reality is far more nuanced. It's about reading people, understanding when to show your teeth and when to offer a hand. "So, what do you think?" he asks the quiet room. "Can fear alone hold an empire together, or does it always crack apart?" The next day, Ignacio decides to shift focus from internal doubts to external moves. He calls Ramon and Tacho into a secure office and outlines a new plan. Small, controlled shipments through lesser-used border crossings, designed to confuse authorities and dilute their resources. "Let them think we're still running large convoys through Texas," Ignacio says. "We'll feed them just enough information to keep them busy chasing shadows. Meanwhile, the real product will move quietly." Tacho nods. "And what about Mauro?" Ignacio's gaze hardens. "Give him a role in the decoy operations. If he's so eager to make noise, he can lead the teams that draw attention. If he succeeds, we benefit. If he fails, he lets the sentence trail off. As preparations begin, Ignacio checks in with his family's safe houses. His relatives sound weary, but he reassures them that their isolation is for their own safety. He knows they're frustrated, but he can't risk their lives or his own peace of mind by bringing them back into the city. That night, alone again in his study, Ignacio flips through the latest reports. The network is still fragile, and he can feel the pressure from authorities building with each passing day. He thinks of his allies in the Federation, El Chapo and El Mayo, and wonders how long they'll continue to support him if the losses keep mounting. He sets the reports aside and looks out at the darkened skyline. Guadalajara has always been the heart of his empire, but now it feels like a battlefield he's slowly losing control of. Tomorrow, the decoy operations will begin. If they work, he'll buy himself some breathing room. If they fail, the results could be catastrophic. Ignacio takes a slow sip of tequila and whispers under his breath, "This has to work." The next morning in Guadalajara is overcast, the gray sky pressing low against the city's tangled streets as Ignacio Coronel Villarreal moves through his operations with a quiet sense of purpose. Today is the day the decoy shipments roll out. His calculated gamble to mislead the authorities while moving his real product under their noses. In a secure warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Ignacio inspects the trucks personally. Each one is loaded with useless cargo meant to attract attention. Boxes of scrap metal, dummy compartments with just enough traceable packaging to lure investigators into believing they've scored a win. Ramon and Tacho watch as Ignacio checks the compartments himself, running a gloved hand along the false seams. "This is bait," Ignacio says softly. "Once the federales and DEA see these trucks, they'll think they've hit the jackpot, but all they'll find is nothing. Meanwhile, the real shipments move elsewhere." Mauro stands nearby, arms crossed, eager to be noticed. Ignacio assigns him to lead the convoy, heading north. "You wanted to make noise," Ignacio tells him, handing over the manifest. "Now's your chance. But remember, the goal isn't to win a fight. It's to draw fire away from the real operation." Mauro smirks. "I can handle it," he says, perhaps a little too confidently. The convoys roll out in staggered intervals that afternoon, each taking different routes across Mexico's labyrinthine highway system. Ignacio remains at the command center, with Ramon and Tacho, monitoring the progress through encrypted radios. Hours later, reports begin trickling in. One of the decoy trucks is stopped outside Monterrey. Another is intercepted near Reynosa. Authorities swarm both scenes, believing they've disrupted major shipments. Ignacio watches the updates with grim satisfaction. "Keep the real convoys moving," he instructs. "They'll be too busy celebrating to notice what's happening elsewhere." By nightfall, 3 decoy shipments have been seized, each one generating media headlines about significant cartel busts. Ignacio doesn't mind the press. He knows the real product, worth millions, is slipping quietly across lesser-known border crossings under the cover of the distractions, but the victory feels hollow. As he studies the photographs of soldiers posing with the seized decoy trucks, Ignacio's phone buzzes with a message that cuts deeper than any headline. A cousin he once trusted has delivered information to the authorities in exchange for immunity. Ignacio calls Ramon into his office. "Is this confirmed?" Ramon nods grimly. "We intercepted communications. He gave them details about a safe house we abandoned last week. If we hadn't moved, we'd all be dead." Ignacio leans back in his chair, the weight of betrayal settling heavily on his shoulders. Family has always been a source of both strength and vulnerability, and this revelation threatens to tear open old wounds. Later that night, Ignacio arranges a private meeting with the cousin in question. They sit across from each other in a dimly lit room, the air thick with unspoken tension. "Why?" Ignacio asks quietly. "After everything I've done for you, why would you hand me to them?" The cousin's voice trembles. "I was scared. They promised they'd leave me alone if I cooperated. I didn't know what else to do." Ignacio stares at him for a long time, the disappointment in his eyes more cutting than any threat. "Fear is a choice," he says softly. "But you made the wrong one. The outcome is inevitable." Ignacio doesn't raise his voice or issue dramatic commands. He simply steps out of the room, leaving Tacho and Ramon to handle what must be done. When it's over, Ignacio walks the perimeter of the property alone, his thoughts heavy and silent. Many people still think that blood ties are unbreakable, that family can be trusted even in the darkest moments. But Ignacio knows better. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Sometimes it guarantees betrayal. So, what do you think? Would you forgive someone who tried to save themselves at your expense? The next morning, Ignacio convenes a smaller meeting with his core team. "We have to assume the authorities know more than we thought," he tells them. "From now on, we treat every property, every shipment, as compromised until proven otherwise." Tacho raises an eyebrow. "That means dismantling some of our biggest operations. We'll lose money. We'll lose more if we stay predictable," Ignacio replies. "We rebuild from the ground up, smaller and smarter. If the Federation doesn't like it, they can take it up with me directly." That evening, Ignacio pours himself a drink and sits alone in his study, staring at the maps pinned to the wall. The decoy operation bought him time, but time is a luxury he knows won't last forever. The authorities are closer than ever, and the cracks in his inner circle are widening. As the clock ticks past midnight, Ignacio whispers to himself, "One mistake is all it takes. And we're running out of second chances." The days that follow are quieter than usual, but Ignacio Coronel Villarreal knows better than to mistake silence for safety. He's now operating from one of his most remote safe houses, a sprawling compound buried deep in the hills of Jalisco. The roads leading here are little more than dirt tracks, winding through forests and farmland that seem untouched by time. It's a place designed for disappearing, and for now, it suits Ignacio's shrinking mobility. The compound is fortified with high walls, armed guards, and surveillance cameras covering every angle. Yet Ignacio feels more isolated than secure. His world has narrowed to a handful of loyal men, a stack of encrypted phones, and a constant stream of updates about raids, rival movements, and cartel politics. He spends much of his time in a dimly lit room that serves as both office and war room. Maps cover the walls, dotted with pins marking routes, safe houses, and known rival locations. On a heavy wooden table lie ledgers, radios, and the ever-present folders Ramon brings in each morning. "This is the latest," Ramon says, dropping a folder on the table. "The authorities hit another property near Tepic. We'd cleared it weeks ago, but they made it look like a big win for the press. They're hunting ghosts now." Ignacio flips through the photographs of soldiers standing triumphantly over burned-out buildings. "Good," he says quietly. "Let them think they're winning. It'll make them careless," but even as he says it, Ignacio knows the pressure is mounting. The decoy operations worked for a while, but the authorities are adjusting, tightening their focus on Guadalajara. and the surrounding states. And the more isolated Ignacio becomes, the more vulnerable he feels. That night, as he walks the perimeter of the compound, he thinks of the family he's dispersed across the region. He calls the safe houses one by one, speaking briefly with each relative. His niece tells him the children are restless. His sister says the elders are growing weary of hiding. Ignacio offers quiet reassurances, but inside, he wonders how long he can keep them safe if his own sanctuary is at risk. Later, he sits on the balcony overlooking the dark hills, the air cool and still. Many people still think that hiding is a sign of weakness, that a true leader should be visible and defiant. But Ignacio knows visibility is a death sentence in his world. "So what do you think?" he asks the empty night. "Is it cowardice to protect yourself or just survival?" The following morning, Ignacio meets with Tacho and Ramon to review their options. "We're running out of properties," Tacho admits. "The army has a list, and they're checking them one by one. We can't stay here forever." "We won't," Ignacio says. "But we can't move until we're ready. We need a new network of safe houses, places no one knows about, not even the Federation. And we need to rebuild the inner circle. Too many people are either compromised or unproven." Ramon hesitates before speaking. "That means cutting loose a lot of men. Some will resent it." "They can resent it from a distance," Ignacio replies sharply. "I'm not dying because someone can't keep their ego in check." Over the next few days, Ignacio begins trimming the organization, quietly removing anyone who isn't absolutely essential. Some are reassigned to remote outposts, others simply disappear. The message is clear. Loyalty isn't negotiable. The compound grows quieter with each passing day. The once bustling corridors now occupied only by a skeleton crew of guards and trusted lieutenants. Ignacio spends long hours alone, poring over maps and ledgers, trying to anticipate the next move from both his enemies and his supposed allies. In moments of rare stillness, his thoughts drift to the early days of his career, when ambition burned brighter than fear. Back then, Guadalajara had felt like a city of limitless opportunity. Now it feels like a cage he can't quite escape. One evening, Ramon approaches with troubling news. "We've picked up chatter," he says. "The Beltran Leyva faction is pushing harder into Jalisco. They're telling people you're finished, that it's only a matter of time before the army takes you down." Ignacio listens without expression. "Let them talk," he says finally. "Words don't kill. But if they step onto my ground, they'll regret it." That night, as the guards patrol the compound and the hills beyond fade into darkness, Ignacio sits at his desk, drafting contingency plans. He knows the walls are closing in, and the options for escape are dwindling. For now, the compound is a sanctuary. But Ignacio Coronel Villarreal has lived too long in this world not to recognize the truth. Sanctuaries can become traps, and he may soon be forced to choose between staying hidden and making a stand. The compound in Jalisco remains quiet for several more days, but Ignacio Coronel Villarreal can feel the tension ratcheting up like a taut wire ready to snap. Word reaches him through his informants that the Beltran Leyva faction has been quietly recruiting operatives inside Guadalajara, targeting people who once worked closely with him. It's not an outright invasion, but a creeping effort to seize territory while his forces remain pinned down. In his war room, Ignacio spreads a map of Guadalajara across the heavy wooden table. He marks the neighborhoods where his influence has slipped, one red circle after another, each like a drop of blood. Tacho stands at his side, arms crossed, while Ramon rattles off reports from the field. "They're trying to push us out of Colonia Chapelita and the northern suburbs," Ramon says. "Our men there are asking for reinforcements." Ignacio shakes his head. "No reinforcements. If we fight openly, we'll draw the army straight to us. We can't afford that." Tacho frowns. "So we just let them take our ground?" "No," Ignacio says quietly. "We make it too expensive for them. Small, targeted strikes, no spectacle, no attention. We make them bleed quietly." That afternoon, Ignacio selects a handful of trusted men for the operation. They'll move in pairs, hitting Beltran operatives in their safe houses and meeting points, leaving no evidence behind. It's the kind of methodical campaign Ignacio prefers. Quiet enough to avoid provoking the government, yet effective enough to remind his rivals that the Crystal King is not to be underestimated. The strikes begin that night. Within 48 hours, several mid-level Beltran operatives vanish without a trace. Others are found dead in alleyways or on remote roads, their disappearances sending ripples of fear through the faction's ranks. But the retaliation is swift. One of Ignacio's warehouses is attacked by armed gunmen, and 2 of his men are killed in the ambush. Tacho brings the news to the compound, slamming a fist on the table in frustration. "They're not backing down," he says. "If anything, they're doubling down." Ignacio listens calmly, though his jaw tightens. He knows Tacho wants to escalate, to strike harder and louder, but Ignacio has no intention of drawing the full wrath of the army and DEA by igniting a public war. "We hold steady," Ignacio says. "The Beltran faction is desperate. They're lashing out because they're scared. The more noise they make, the easier it will be for the authorities to focus on them instead of us." Yet Ignacio can't ignore the growing sense of isolation. The Sinaloa Federation has offered little support, preferring to let him handle the problem himself. He suspects El Chapo and El Mayo see this conflict as a way to gauge his strength, or perhaps even as an opportunity to let him weaken the Beltran Leyva faction without committing their own resources. That night, Ignacio walks the compound grounds alone, the sound of gravel crunching under his boots. He thinks of the men he's lost, of the family he's sent into hiding, of the city that now feels like enemy territory. Many people still think that cartels thrive on violence, that the bloodshed is a show of strength. But Ignacio knows that violence without strategy is a death sentence. "So, what do you think?" he murmurs to the night. "Do you win by fighting harder or by fighting smarter?" The next day, Ramon brings him new intelligence. The Beltran faction is planning to move a large shipment of weapons through Guadalajara, using it to fortify their growing presence in the region. "This is our chance," Ramon says. "If we hit them hard and seize the shipment, we cripple their expansion. They'll think twice before coming after us again." Ignacio considers the proposal carefully. A successful strike could shift the balance back in his favor, but a misstep could expose his own network and bring the army down on them. After a long pause, he makes the decision. "We'll take the shipment," Ignacio says, "but we do it my way, clean and quiet, no firefights in the streets, no headlines. Preparations begin immediately." Ignacio personally selects the team, ensuring each man has been thoroughly vetted. He knows that one betrayal, one loose tongue, could unravel everything. On the night of the operation, Ignacio stands in the command room, listening to the radio chatter as his men move into position. The Beltran convoy enters Guadalajara under cover of darkness, unaware that they're being shadowed. When the ambush comes, it's swift and surgical. Tires are spiked, engines disabled, and the armed guards are neutralized before they can fire more than a few shots. Within minutes, the weapons shipment is in Ignacio's possession, and the surviving Beltran operatives have vanished into the night. It's a clean victory, one that bolsters morale within his organization. But Ignacio doesn't celebrate. He knows the Beltran faction will not take this loss lightly. They'll come back harder, and when they do, he may not be able to keep the fight contained. As he surveys the crates of seized weapons in the warehouse, Ignacio whispers to himself, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." The days after the weapon seizure feel charged, like the uneasy stillness before a storm. Ignacio Coronel Villarreal keeps the crates locked away in a hidden warehouse, guarded by a rotating team of his most trusted men. He knows the Beltran Leyva faction won't just shrug off the loss. They'll respond. The question is when and how. From the compound in Jalisco, Ignacio reviews reports of unusual activity in Guadalajara. Armed men spotted in convoys without plates. Unknown faces appearing in neighborhoods he once controlled. Every detail suggests the Beltran faction is probing for weaknesses, preparing for something bigger. "We've hurt them," Ramon says during a strategy meeting. "But they're regrouping. If they hit us again, it won't be quiet." Ignacio nods, tapping a finger on the map pinned to the wall. "They're trying to flush me out," he says. "They know I'm here, somewhere, and they think enough pressure will force me to move." "They're wrong." Tacho shifts uneasily. "What if they come here? What if they've found this place?" "They haven't," Ignacio replies firmly. "But we prepare anyway. Double the perimeter security. Move the family again, split them up into smaller groups, and make sure the weapons shipment is moved to a secondary location. If they want a war, they'll have to fight ghosts." As the days pass, the pressure mounts. Several of Ignacio's safe houses are raided by soldiers, though they're mostly empty thanks to his constant relocations. The army seizes vehicles and cash, parading the results on television as proof of their success. Ignacio watches the broadcasts from the compound's secure room, noting the faces of the generals who give interviews. "Many people still think these raids mean they're winning," Ignacio says quietly to Ramon. "But it's smoke and mirrors. They need the public to believe they're in control, even when they're chasing shadows. So what do you think? Can they keep up the illusion forever?" The following week, Ignacio receives word that the army has surrounded one of his warehouses in Guadalajara. It's not the one holding the weapons, but it's a critical logistics hub. If they seize it, the loss will cripple his supply chain. "We can't let them take it," Tacho insists. "We have to defend it." Ignacio shakes his head. "No, we abandon it. If we fight, we draw too much attention. And if we lose everything. Let them think they've scored another victory. It's a difficult decision, one that leaves some of his men frustrated. But Ignacio knows that fighting the army head-on is a losing battle. He'd rather sacrifice a warehouse than risk a confrontation that could expose his location. That night, Ignacio walks the perimeter of the compound, the cool mountain air carrying the distant sounds of the countryside. He thinks of the family he sent scattering like leaves in the wind, of the lieutenants who've started whispering about his increasingly defensive posture. He knows some view his caution as weakness, but Ignacio has no intention of dying in a blaze of glory. He's seen too many cartel leaders fall that way, their deaths celebrated on the evening news. He intends to outlast them all, even if it means swallowing his pride. The following morning, he calls a meeting with his core team. "We're going underground," he tells them. "No more unnecessary movements. No more high-profile operations. We focus only on what keeps us alive and funded." Ramon raises an eyebrow. "And the Beltran faction? We'll deal with them when the time is right," Ignacio says. "For now, Let them waste their resources trying to find us. The longer we stay invisible, the stronger we get." But even as he speaks, Ignacio senses the noose tightening. His mobility has shrunk to a handful of safe houses, and the compound is the last true sanctuary. If it's discovered, the consequences will be catastrophic. That evening, Ignacio receives a call from a source inside the federal police. The message is brief and chilling. "They know where you are. They're coming." Ignacio hangs up and stares at the phone, his mind racing. He immediately calls Ramon and Tacho into the room. "We're leaving," he says. "Now. Get everyone ready. We don't have much time." Outside, the guards are already on edge, scanning the dark hills for signs of movement. Ignacio can feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, the inevitability of what's about to happen. Within the hour, headlights appear on the distant road. Dozens of military vehicles, their engines growling like predators closing in on prey. Ignacio watches from the balcony, his jaw set. "This is it," he says softly, almost to himself. "They've found us." The compound's alarms begin to wail as soldiers fan out, cutting off every possible exit. Ignacio gives a single nod to Ramon and Tacho. "We hold them off as long as we can. Move the family. Get the weapons out. This is our last stand." As the first gunfire echoes in the distance and the night erupts in chaos, Ignacio grips the rifle handed to him by one of his men. The Crystal King of Guadalajara is no stranger to sieges, but he knows this one will be unlike any he's faced before. The alarms scream through the compound as Ignacio Coronel Villarreal moves quickly, his movements precise, his expression unreadable. This isn't the first time soldiers have come close, but he knows it's different now. The federal army is here in force, and from the sound of it, they've brought enough men and firepower to reduce the compound to rubble if they have to. Ramon rushes into the room, his rifle slung across his shoulder. "We can still break out through the eastern road," he says, breathing hard. "It's not fully blocked yet." Ignacio shakes his head. "They'll be expecting that. It's too obvious. We try to punch through, and we'll be dead before we hit the highway." Tacho bursts in next, his face pale. "They're cutting the power grid. We've got maybe 15 minutes before we're completely blind." Ignacio glances at the security monitors, watching as soldiers take up positions outside the walls. He can see the glint of their night vision goggles, the flash of hand signals in the darkness. "Get the family out now," he says firmly. "Use the tunnels under the north wing. They'll open 2 miles out. Make sure they have the weapons convoy with them. If I don't make it, they'll need those guns." Tacho hesitates, clearly unwilling to leave Ignacio behind, but Ignacio's sharp look silences any protest. "I'm not asking," he says quietly. Once they're gone, Ignacio turns to Ramon. "We buy as much time as we can," he says, gripping his rifle. "If they breach the gates, we fall back to the central hall. From there, we hold until the family is clear." Ramon nods grimly. "We'll hold," he says, though they both know what that means. The first wave of soldiers approaches the outer gates, their heavy boots crunching against the gravel. Ignacio's men open fire, the crack of automatic rifles echoing through the hills. The soldiers return fire immediately, bullets tearing into the walls as flashbangs and tear gas grenades arc through the air. Ignacio moves with precision, directing his men from one position to the next, ensuring no blind spots are left undefended. He's calm, almost unnervingly so, even as explosions shake the compound. A young guard runs up to him, panic in his eyes. "They've breached the south wall," he shouts. "Fall back," Ignacio orders. "Regroup in the hall. Don't waste ammo trying to be a hero." They retreat deeper into the compound, the soldiers advancing relentlessly behind them. Ignacio can hear the distant thrum of helicopters overhead, their searchlights slicing through the night sky. He knows the army won't stop until they've secured the entire property, or leveled it. In the central hall, Ignacio checks the time. He knows the family should be clear by now, slipping away through the tunnels with Tacho at the lead. That thought brings a flicker of relief, but it's quickly replaced by the cold reality of his own situation. Many people still think that men like Ignacio, men with power and wealth and soldiers at their command, can survive anything. But Ignacio knows better. He's seen too many kings fall, their empires crumbling in a single night. "So, what do you think?" he asks softly, half to himself. "Is this the night the Crystal King disappears?" The soldiers close in, their boots echoing through the corridors. Ignacio positions his men carefully, covering every entrance. He kneels behind an overturned table, rifle steady, and waits. The breach comes in an instant. Doors blasted open, soldiers flooding in with shields and rifles. Ignacio fires with cold precision, each shot measured, each movement efficient. He can feel the recoil in his shoulders, hear the shouts and screams as the firefight rages around him. One of his men falls at his side, hit in the chest. Ignacio pulls him back behind cover, but it's clear the wound is fatal. The young man grips Ignacio's hand with blood-slick fingers before going still. Ignacio doesn't allow himself a moment of grief. Ramon shouts from across the hall. "We're surrounded!" Ignacio looks around, assessing the situation. They're running low on ammunition. The soldiers are tightening the net, and every exit is blocked. He knows they can't hold much longer. "Fall back to the inner chamber," Ignacio calls out. "It's our last position. Move!" The surviving men scramble deeper into the compound, Ignacio at the rear, covering their retreat. He can hear the soldiers advancing behind them, the crack of gunfire echoing off the stone walls. In the inner chamber, Ignacio slams the heavy door shut and bars it with a steel beam. He turns to the remaining men, their faces pale and grim. "This is where we make our stand," he says simply. The men nod, understanding the gravity of his words. There's no way out now. They'll fight until the last bullet is spent, and after that, they'll fight with whatever they have left. Ignacio grips his rifle tighter and takes a deep breath, centering himself. He knows the family is safe, and that thought gives him a measure of peace. But he also knows the army won't stop until they have him in their sights. As the soldiers begin pounding on the door, Ignacio raises his weapon and steels himself for what's coming. The Crystal King of Guadalajara isn't finished yet, but he can feel the end closing in. The pounding at the steel-reinforced door grows louder, each strike reverberating through the inner chamber like a drumbeat of inevitability. Ignacio Coronel Villarreal stands at the center, rifle cradled in his hands, his back straight. Around him, the last of his men reload with trembling hands, faces slick with sweat. "Check your ammo," Ignacio says quietly, though the calm in his voice is almost eerie. "No wasted shots. We make every round count." Ramon nods, wiping his brow with a sleeve. "There's no way out," he murmurs, his voice low enough for only Ignacio to hear. "There's always a way," Ignacio replies. But even as he says it, he knows the options are dwindling. The tunnels are sealed, the walls surrounded. The soldiers outside have time, numbers, and firepower on their side. He only has precision and the hope of buying more time. The soldiers breach the door in a blinding explosion. Flashbangs detonate in the chamber, sending white-hot light and deafening concussions ricocheting through the confined space. Ignacio drops to one knee, blinking away the shock as the first wave of troops pours in. Gunfire erupts instantly, the echoing cracks deafening in the enclosed space. Ignacio fires with ruthless efficiency, each shot deliberate. A soldier drops, then another. But for every one that falls, 2 more push forward, shields raised, rifles barking. Ramon takes a hit in the shoulder but keeps firing, teeth clenched against the pain. Ignacio pulls him behind cover, tearing a strip from his shirt to stem the bleeding. "You're not dying on me yet," Ignacio says firmly, but Ramon's eyes tell him they both understand the reality. Tear gas begins to fill the chamber, thick and acrid, burning eyes and lungs. Ignacio pulls a mask over his face, but he can hear the gas coughing fits of the men who don't have one. The soldiers are methodical, driving them back inch by inch. "Push them!" Ignacio shouts, rallying the survivors for a counterattack. They surge forward in a desperate burst, forcing the soldiers to retreat momentarily. It's a small victory, but it buys precious seconds. "We can't hold this much longer," Ramon gasps, his voice hoarse. Ignacio glances around the chamber, calculating. There's a narrow maintenance passage behind the old generator, one he'd ordered sealed months ago because it was unstable. It isn't ideal, but it's the only option left. "Cover me," he tells Ramon, then crawls to the rusting generator and kicks away the loose bricks concealing the passage. The opening is narrow, jagged, barely wide enough for a grown man. "Go," Ignacio says, waving Ramon toward it. Ramon hesitates. "Not without you." Ignacio shakes his head. "You're wounded. You'll slow me down. Get out and regroup with Tacho and the family. If I make it, I'll find you." Ramon stares at him for a long moment before crawling into the dark tunnel. Ignacio watches him disappear, then turns back to the remaining men. "You follow him," he orders, pointing to the passage. "One at a time. If you stay, you die here." The men scramble through the tunnel as soldiers press closer, their bullets chipping stone from the walls. Ignacio fires in controlled bursts, holding the line until the last of his men is gone. Now he's alone. He takes a deep breath, the gas stinging his lungs, and steps back from the passage, pulling a loose brick into place behind him. He's cut off now, but the others have a chance. That's all that matters. Ignacio moves deeper into the chamber, taking up a final defensive position. He knows he can't win, but he can make the soldiers pay for every inch they take. He steadies his rifle and focuses, every sense sharpened. Many people still think that men like Ignacio die quickly in a blaze of bullets and bravado. But Ignacio understands that survival is about calculation, about controlling the end as much as the beginning. "So what do you think?" he whispers to himself. "Does a man like me get to choose how it ends?" The door bursts open again, soldiers flooding in behind shields. Ignacio squeezes the trigger, sending precise bursts into the advancing line. Each shot lands, but the wave is unstoppable. A grenade lands near his cover. Ignacio dives away as the blast rips through the chamber, throwing him against the wall. Pain sears his side, but he grits his teeth and pulls himself upright. He won't go down on his knees. With his last magazine in the rifle, Ignacio makes his stand. The soldiers close in, and the room is consumed by the deafening roar of gunfire. As the clip runs dry, Ignacio lowers the weapon, chest heaving. He can see the soldiers raising their rifles for the final volley, but there's no fear in his eyes, only defiance. The chamber smells of cordite and smoke as Ignacio Coronel Villarreal drops the empty rifle, the metal clattering against the cracked stone floor. He takes a slow breath, his chest heaving as the soldiers fan out before him. Their weapons remain trained on his body, fingers tense on the triggers. He can see the sweat on their faces beneath their helmets, the nervous flick of their eyes as they take in the figure of the Crystal King still standing. But then, a voice cuts through the chaos, a quiet, almost hesitant voice in Ignacio's earpiece. He'd forgotten it was still there, a relic from earlier coordination with his lieutenants. It's not Ramon or Tacho. It's someone unexpected. Nacho, the voice whispers, using the name only a few close allies ever dare. We can get you out, but you'll have to trust me. Ignacio freezes, glancing instinctively toward the crumbling wall behind him. He recognizes the voice immediately. It belongs to Manuel, a former rival he'd clashed with years ago. Their history is complicated. Blood spilled on both sides, grudges deep as the Jalisco valleys. You're late, Ignacio murmurs under his breath, keeping his eyes fixed on the soldiers creeping closer. I'm not here to save you, Manuel says through the static, but I can get you out for a price. You disappear, and I take Guadalajara. That's the deal. You refuse, and I hang up. Ignacio's lips curl into the faintest smile. Many people still think that cartels are built solely on loyalty, but Ignacio knows the truth. They are built on deals, bargains struck in desperation. So what do you think? He whispers softly. Can a king step off his throne and still be a king? The soldiers bark orders, telling him to drop to his knees. Ignacio doesn't move. He can feel the weight of Manuel's offer pressing on him as sharply as the barrels pointed at his chest. Escape means giving up everything he's built, vanishing into exile. Staying means certain death, though perhaps a death on his own terms. I need a decision, Manuel hisses through the earpiece. There's a back tunnel the soldiers haven't found yet. I can open it from my side, but only once. You have 10 seconds. Ignacio closes his eyes for a moment, thinking of the family he sent scattering across Mexico, of Ramon bleeding in that tunnel, of Tacho trying to hold the pieces together. He thinks of Guadalajara, the city he's ruled for so long, and how easily someone else could step in to claim it if he were gone. The soldiers shout again, growing impatient. One steps forward, rifle raised. Ignacio exhales slowly and makes his choice. In one fluid motion, he tosses a flashbang grenade he'd kept clipped to his belt. The chamber erupts in light and sound, disorienting the soldiers long enough for Ignacio to dive behind a stack of crates and rip the earpiece from his collar. Open it, he mutters. A section of the wall gives way, revealing a narrow tunnel shrouded in darkness. Ignacio slips inside, moving fast, even as his muscles scream from the earlier blast. The tunnel is rough-hewn and claustrophobic, barely wide enough to move through. He can hear distant gunfire behind him as the soldiers recover, their shouts echoing through the chamber. Manuel's voice crackles through the earpiece again. You're welcome, Nacho. But remember, Guadalajara is mine now. If you ever come back, it won't be as a king. Ignacio doesn't answer. He knows Manuel's help isn't charity. It's a calculated move to seize power while Ignacio disappears into the shadows. But for now, survival is the only currency that matters. The tunnel opens into the cool night air miles away from the compound. Ignacio pulls himself up through the exit, breathing deeply as the stars spread out above him. He's free. For now. But the cost is steep. Waiting for him at the rendezvous point is a small group of Manuel's men. They hand Ignacio a change of clothes, a pistol, and a set of keys to a waiting truck. No words are exchanged. The arrangement is clear. Ignacio drives into the darkness, the headlights carving a narrow path through the empty countryside. He knows the army will announce his death in the morning, parading their supposed victory on television. Many will believe it. Perhaps even Ramon and Tacho will, if they're still alive. But Ignacio Coronel Villarreal isn't dead, not yet. He's a ghost now, stripped of his empire, hunted by his enemies, and burdened with the knowledge that the city he built will soon belong to someone else. As the truck rattles along the dirt road, Ignacio whispers to himself, "The Crystal King is gone. But maybe, just maybe, the man behind him can survive." The truck rattles along the rough, empty roads of rural Jalisco, every bump sending a jolt through Ignacio Coronel Villarreal's battered body. He grips the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, eyes scanning the rearview mirror for headlights. But there's nothing behind him. No soldiers, no helicopters, no flashing lights. Just darkness and the sound of cicadas in the distance. He doesn't slow down until the clock on the dashboard reads nearly 3 hours past midnight. Ignacio pulls off onto a narrow dirt path leading into a grove of mesquite trees, parking the truck beneath the thick canopy. He cuts the engine and sits in the silence, the adrenaline slowly draining from his system. For the first time in years, Ignacio is completely alone. No guards, no lieutenants, no family. Just the weight of his thoughts. He leans back in the seat and closes his eyes, replaying the events of the siege. The soldiers swarming the compound, Ramon's wounded expression as he disappeared into the tunnel, the choice he made to accept Manuel's help. That decision may have saved his life, but it cost him everything else. He wonders if Ramon made it out alive. He wonders if Tacho got the family to safety. He wonders how long it will take before the army announces his death to the world, holding a press conference about how they've eliminated one of Mexico's most wanted traffickers. Many people still think that the moment a cartel leader falls off the radar, he's finished, that he's powerless without his army of loyal men. Ignacio knows the truth is far more complicated. "So what do you think?" he mutters softly into the darkness. "Am I dead, or just invisible now?" By morning, Ignacio is deep into the Sierra Madre Mountains, traveling on foot after abandoning the truck. He avoids towns and villages, sticking to dry riverbeds and cattle trails, moving like a shadow through the rugged terrain. He finds temporary shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut, its crumbling stone walls offering little comfort, but some measure of concealment. There, he tends to his injuries with the rudimentary supplies Manuel's men had given him: a roll of bandages, a small bottle of antiseptic, and painkillers that barely dull the throbbing in his ribs. As he cleans the cuts on his arms, Ignacio's mind circles back to Manuel's ultimatum. "Guadalajara is mine now. If you ever come back, it won't be as a king." The words sting, not because Ignacio doubts them, but because he knows they're true. By disappearing, he's surrendered the city he once controlled with unshakable authority. And yet, he can't bring himself to regret the choice. Dead men can't rebuild. That night, Ignacio uses a cheap burner phone to call a single number, a contact in Mazatlan who owes him a favor. The man's voice trembles when he answers. "You're supposed to be dead," the man whispers. "Not yet," Ignacio replies. "I need a safe house, somewhere no one will look, and I need to know if my people are alive." The man hesitates before saying, "There's a property on the coast near San Ignacio. You can stay there for a while." Ignacio thanks him and ends the call, destroying the phone immediately after. He knows the man's loyalty is fragile, held together by debt and fear, and that he can't rely on him for long. The journey to San Ignacio takes 3 days. Ignacio moves only at night, resting in the dense underbrush during the day. He survives on bottled water and stale food he bought quietly from roadside vendors, keeping his head down and his face obscured. When he finally reaches the coastal safe house, it's little more than a modest bungalow hidden behind palm trees and overgrown shrubs. But it has running water, a working lock on the door, and a view of the ocean that stretches endlessly into the horizon. For now, it's enough. Inside, Ignacio sits at a small wooden table and spreads out a fresh notebook. He begins listing names, those he can trust, those he suspects of betrayal, those who might be persuaded to help him rebuild. He pauses when he writes Ramon's name. Did Ramon survive the siege? Would he even trust Ignacio again after being left behind? The same question lingers for Tacho and the rest of his family. Ignacio sets down the pen and leans back in the chair, staring out the window at the dark waves crashing against the shore. His empire may be gone, but the instinct to rebuild is still there, sharp and unyielding. For now, though, Ignacio knows he must disappear completely. He must become a ghost in truth, resurfacing only when the world believes he's long forgotten. He whispers to himself, "Let them think I'm dead. It's better that way." The morning in Tepic is quiet, the sun rising slowly over the low hills as Ignacio Coronel Villarreal sits at a small table in Ramon's safe house, sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug. Across from him, Ramon's arm is still bound in a sling, his movements deliberate, his face drawn with fatigue. But there is something in his eyes, relief at seeing Ignacio alive, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. "You shouldn't have come here," Ramon says softly, his voice rough from days of hiding. "If the army tracks you, they'll hit this place like they hit the compound." Ignacio shakes his head. "They think I'm dead," he replies, "and we're going to keep it that way." He lays out a map of western Mexico on the table, his finger tracing the old supply routes and safe houses they once controlled. "Manuel controls Guadalajara now," Ignacio says, "but he won't expect us to move so soon. We're not ready to strike, but we can start planting roots. Piece by piece, we'll rebuild our network in the shadows." Ramon nods slowly. "We'll need money, and we'll need loyal men who aren't already working for Manuel or the Beltran Leyva faction." Ignacio pulls out the notebook he's been carrying since San Ignacio. "I've been making a list," he says, flipping through the pages. "Old contacts, men who owe me favors, businessmen who made fortunes off our product. Some of them will have switched sides, but a few will still be with us." That night, they begin making discreet calls using encrypted phones, reaching out to men they can trust. The responses are mixed. Some hang up immediately, fearful of retribution from Manuel's forces. Others hesitate, unwilling to commit, but a handful agree to meet. Within a week, Ignacio and Ramon are seated in a dimly lit warehouse outside Mazatlan with 3 of their old lieutenants. The men are visibly nervous, glancing around as if they expect soldiers to burst in at any moment. "We heard you were dead," one of them says, voice hushed. "That's exactly what I need people to believe," Ignacio replies calmly. "If Manuel or the Federales think I'm alive, they'll hunt us down. But if they think I'm gone, we can move quietly. We can rebuild." The men exchange uneasy glances. One asks the question they're all thinking. Why not disappear for good? You could start over somewhere far from here. Why risk everything again? Ignacio's eyes harden. Because I'm not the type to run. Guadalajara was mine, and it will be mine again. I'm not asking for blind loyalty. I'm asking you to see the bigger picture. Manuel won't protect you when the army turns on him, but if we rebuild the network, we'll be untouchable. The men nod slowly, convinced more by Ignacio's quiet certainty than his words. By the end of the meeting, they agree to provide safe houses, trucks, and access to local businesses for laundering cash. As the weeks pass, Ignacio and Ramon begin re-establishing their presence. They avoid the major cities at first, focusing on rural routes and small towns where Manuel's influence is weaker. Money begins to flow again, not in the torrents it once did, but enough to keep their operation alive. But Ignacio knows this period of rebuilding can't last forever. One mistake, one loose tongue, and Manuel, or the army, will discover he's alive. One night, Ramon brings troubling news. Manuel is consolidating power in Guadalajara, he says. He's bringing in new muscle from the Beltran Leyva faction. They're talking about launching an offensive against the Sinaloa Federation to take more territory. Ignacio leans back in his chair, considering the implications. If Manuel moves against Sinaloa, he'll be overextending himself. That's when we strike. But we have to be patient. If we move too early, we'll lose everything. Many people still think that cartel power is maintained through constant action, through always staying on the offensive. But Ignacio knows better. So what do you think? He asks Ramon quietly. Do we wait for the perfect moment? Or does that moment never come? For now, Ignacio chooses patience. He sends word through his growing network that they are not to challenge Manuel directly. Instead, they continue to gather resources, recruiting disillusioned men from Manuel's ranks and strengthening ties with small-time traffickers in Michoacan and Colima. Weeks turn into months. Ignacio grows accustomed to living in the shadows, moving from one safe house to another, never staying in the same place twice. The world believes he's dead, and that belief is his greatest weapon. But each day, the desire to reclaim Guadalajara burns hotter. He knows Manuel is getting comfortable, and comfort is a weakness Ignacio can exploit. One evening, as he and Ramon study maps under the faint glow of a single bulb, Ignacio murmurs, "We'll make our move soon. But when we do, it has to be decisive. One strike, and Manuel's empire collapses." He closes the notebook and looks at Ramon. And then, we take back everything. The months in hiding have sharpened Ignacio Coronel Villarreal's instincts. He moves like a ghost now, never in the same place for more than a few nights, traveling along forgotten roads that snake through Mexico's countryside. The longer he stays invisible, the stronger his network grows. But he knows invisibility has an expiration date. One evening, Ignacio and Ramon meet with a trusted informant in a small village on the outskirts of Colima. They sit in the back room of a dusty cantina, the low hum of ranchera music masking their quiet conversation. "Manuel has grown sloppy," the informant whispers, eyes darting toward the doorway. "He's hosting meetings in Guadalajara with almost no security. He thinks he's untouchable." Ignacio leans forward, his voice calm. "When's the next meeting?" "2 nights from now. He'll be at a hacienda outside Zapopan. There will be guards, but nothing compared to what you used to have at your compound." Ramon shoots Ignacio a wary glance. "It's a trap," he says. "It has to be. He'll be expecting you to make a move." Ignacio shakes his head. "Manuel doesn't think I'm alive, and that's our advantage." They leave the cantina under cover of darkness, riding in the back of a truck driven by one of their new recruits. Ignacio remains quiet, thinking through the possibilities. Attacking Manuel now could shift the balance of power instantly, but it could also expose everything they've built over the past months. Back at the safe house, Ramon presses him again. "We're not ready," he insists. "Our numbers are too small. If we lose this strike, It's over. Ignacio stares at the map pinned to the wall, the roads and safe houses marked in red. If we wait too long, Manuel will consolidate his power completely, he says. We'll be the ones with no way back. This is our moment. The following night, Ignacio personally scouts the hacienda outside Zapopan. He watches from a distance through binoculars, noting the patterns of the guards, the vehicles parked in the courtyard, the weak points in the perimeter. When he returns to the safe house, he gathers Ramon and a small team of loyal men. We'll strike at dawn, Ignacio says. We move fast, take Manuel alive if we can. If not, we eliminate him and send a message to everyone in Guadalajara that the Crystal King is still here. Ramon hesitates, but ultimately nods. He knows Ignacio's mind is made up. The operation begins in the early hours of the morning. Ignacio's team approaches the hacienda silently, cutting through the outer fence and moving in pairs across the open fields. The guards are still groggy from the night, their patrols lazy and predictable. Ignacio signals for the breach, and the first shots crack through the dawn air. Guards drop before they can raise alarms, and the team floods into the courtyard. Inside the hacienda, chaos erupts. Manuel's men scramble for weapons as Ignacio's team sweeps through the halls. Ignacio moves with cold precision, rifle steady, his senses heightened by months of survival in the shadows. They find Manuel in the main dining room, clutching a pistol, his face pale with disbelief. You, he breathes, lowering the gun slowly. You're supposed to be dead. Ignacio steps forward, his voice low and deadly calm. I was. But you made the mistake of forgetting who I am. For a moment, Manuel's bravado flickers. He tries to negotiate, offering alliances and concessions, but Ignacio doesn't waver. You wanted Guadalajara, he says. Now you'll pay the price. The room explodes in gunfire as Manuel's last loyal guards make a desperate stand. Ignacio's men respond with ruthless efficiency, cutting them down one by one. Manuel tries to flee through a side door, but Ignacio is faster. He corners him in the hallway, weapon raised. It's over, Ignacio says simply. Manuel stares at him, chest heaving. You'll never hold Guadalajara, he spits. They'll come for you next. The army, the DEA, the Federation, none of them will let you live. Ignacio's expression doesn't change. They'll have to find me first. The shot echoes through the empty hallway, and Manuel crumples to the floor. Ignacio steps back, breathing heavily. He knows this strike will send shock waves through Guadalajara, but it also shatters the illusion of his death. The army and the Federation will know he's alive. Ramon approaches cautiously. What now? He asks. Ignacio looks around the blood-spattered hacienda. Now, he says, we take back everything. Many people still think that regaining power is about showing strength immediately, but Ignacio knows the truth is about precision. So, what do you think? He says quietly. Will they fear me more now that I've returned from the dead? As the sun rises over Zapopan, Ignacio and his team load into their vehicles and disappear into the countryside, leaving the hacienda silent, except for the echoes of what just took place. The news of Manuel's death spreads through Guadalajara like wildfire, whispered first in the back rooms of cantinas, then shouted openly in the streets. For months, the city had believed Ignacio Coronel Villarreal was dead, reduced to a ghostly cautionary tale. Now, the sudden collapse of Manuel's short-lived empire proves otherwise. In a safe house deep in the hills of Michoacan, Ignacio listens to radio broadcasts about the incident at the hacienda. The government is claiming the deaths were the result of internal cartel disputes. but everyone who matters knows better. Ignacio has returned, and with his return comes the kind of fear only a man thought buried can inspire. Ramon enters the room quietly, his shoulder still stiff from his wound, but his eyes alight with purpose. "We've already had 3 crews reach out," he reports. "They want back in. They're scared of what you'll do if they stay with Manuel's remnants." Ignacio leans back in his chair. "Tell them we're rebuilding, but we choose who we trust. This time, there's no room for ambition without loyalty. Reuniting the network isn't easy. Many of the lieutenants who once served under Ignacio have scattered, some aligning with rival factions, others simply vanishing into anonymity. But his legend draws people back, men who would rather serve the Crystal King than face his wrath. In the weeks following Manuel's death, Ignacio's forces quietly retake key territories in Guadalajara. Small warehouses, stash houses, and border routes fall back under his control. He doesn't celebrate each victory. He treats them as steps in a process. "We can't make the same mistakes," Ignacio tells Ramon one night as they study a map littered with pins. "The old network was too exposed. Too many people knew too much. This time, we build smaller, tighter, harder to break." Ramon nods. "But the army will know you're alive now, and the Federation will too. They won't ignore you forever." Ignacio allows himself a thin smile. "That's fine. Let them focus on me. It'll make them careless." His words prove prophetic. Within weeks, federal raids increase throughout Guadalajara, but they hit mostly decoys, empty safe houses planted with just enough evidence to satisfy the press. Each televised victory buys Ignacio more time to strengthen his position, but Ignacio knows the pressure is building. The Sinaloa Federation, once his allies, are rumored to be discussing whether Ignacio's return disrupts their larger operations. Some say El Chapo and El Mayo may decide to eliminate him before the army does. One evening, Ignacio receives a message from a Federation intermediary, an invitation to a meeting. "They want to talk about the future," Ramon says, reading the note aloud. "It's not an invitation," Ignacio replies. "It's a test. They want to see if I'll show weakness." Ramon looks uneasy. "And will you go?" Ignacio gazes at the map on the wall. "Yes, because if I don't, they'll assume I'm hiding. And if they think I'm hiding, they'll kill me anyway." The meeting is arranged in a remote ranch outside Durango, the same kind of secluded compound where Ignacio once met with Chapo and Mayo years ago. He arrives with a small security detail, careful not to appear confrontational. Inside, the atmosphere is tense. Chapo is seated at the head of the table, his restless energy barely contained, while Mayo watches quietly from the corner, his expression unreadable. "You've caused a lot of noise," Chapo says bluntly, as Ignacio takes a seat. "Manuel's dead, the army's hunting you again, and now the Americans are asking questions. This isn't good for business." Ignacio meets his gaze without flinching. "Business wasn't good when Manuel was in charge either. He was sloppy. I won't make his mistakes." Mayo leans forward slightly. "What's your plan, Nacho? You want Guadalajara back? Fine. But the Federation can't afford another war. You step out of line, we cut you loose. Permanently." "I don't want a war," Ignacio replies. "I want stability. And if Guadalajara is stable, it's good for all of us. Let me handle my territory my way, and you'll have nothing to worry about." Chapo studies him for a long moment before glancing at Mayo. Finally, he nods. "Fine. But understand this. If you bring heat on us, you won't live long enough to regret it. The meeting ends without handshakes, but Ignacio knows it's the best outcome he could hope for. He's bought himself time, though how much is uncertain. On the way back to Michoacan, Ramon asks, "Do you think they'll honor their word?" Ignacio looks out the window at the darkening sky. "For now," he says quietly. "But men like them never forget a threat, and I've just become one again." Many people still think that surviving in this world is about sheer force. Ignacio knows it's about balance, appearing strong enough to deter attack, yet cooperative enough to avoid becoming the target of a coalition. "So, what do you think?" he murmurs to himself. Can a man walk that line forever? As the convoy slips into the night, Ignacio knows the stakes have never been higher. He has reclaimed pieces of his empire, but he also knows the walls are closing in again. The Army, the DEA, and the Federation all have reasons to see him gone. But Ignacio Coronel Villarreal has learned how to survive in the shadows, and this time he intends to make the shadows work for him. The weeks following Ignacio Coronel Villarreal's tense meeting with Chapo and Mayo are a balancing act of precision and caution. Ignacio knows the Federation is watching him closely, waiting for the slightest misstep. He also knows the Federal Army and the DEA are pouring resources into Guadalajara, convinced that the resurgence of violence means the Crystal King is alive and rebuilding. In a secluded safe house on the outskirts of Tepic, Ignacio studies a map pinned to the wall, dotted with red and black markers. The red pins are the Federation's assets, the black pins are the Army's known checkpoints, and the blank spaces in between are the narrow corridors where Ignacio can still move freely. "We're hemmed in on all sides," Ramon observes, standing at Ignacio's shoulder. "One mistake and they'll box us in." "We're not boxed in," Ignacio replies calmly. "We're invisible, and that's how we'll stay until the time is right." Ramon nods, but doesn't look convinced. The raids have intensified, and several of their smaller safe houses have been destroyed. Each raid leaves Ignacio's organization slightly weaker, though the Army still hasn't captured anything significant. One evening, a trusted courier brings news that changes everything. A major weapons shipment, bound for Manuel's former allies in the Beltran Leyva faction, is set to pass through the port of Manzanillo. If Ignacio can intercept it, he'll gain enough firepower to secure Guadalajara fully and cripple his enemies in the process. "This is our chance," Ramon says, excitement flickering in his voice. Ignacio doesn't answer immediately. He knows the risks. An operation of this size could expose his entire network if it goes wrong, but without a decisive move, his enemies will eventually regain the upper hand. "Gather the men," Ignacio says finally. "We take the shipment." The operation is planned with meticulous care. Ignacio personally scouts the port, memorizing patrol patterns and the layout of the warehouses. On the night of the strike, his team moves silently through the shadows, cutting the perimeter fences and neutralizing the guards before they can sound the alarm. Inside the warehouse, they find crates stacked high, packed with rifles, ammunition, and explosives. It's enough to supply an army. Ignacio's men begin loading the crates into waiting trucks, working quickly and efficiently. But as the last truck pulls out of the port, headlights flare in the distance. The army has arrived. "Go!" Ignacio shouts, climbing into the lead vehicle as gunfire erupts behind them. The convoy barrels down the highway, bullets pinging off the reinforced panels as soldiers give chase. Ignacio stays calm, directing his drivers through a series of back roads that twist through the countryside. One by one, they lose the pursuing vehicles until the convoy slips into the safety of the mountains. By dawn, The trucks are hidden in a remote warehouse, and Ignacio surveys the cache of weapons with quiet satisfaction. This changes everything, he tells Ramon. Now we're not just surviving. We're ready to take back what's ours. Word of the heist spreads quickly. Rivals whisper that Ignacio is building an army, and the Federation grows uneasy. Chapo sends an emissary to remind Ignacio of their agreement. No wars, the man says pointedly. There won't be, Ignacio replies with a faint smile. As long as no one gets in my way. The show of strength draws more former allies back into Ignacio's fold. Safe houses multiply, stash routes reopen, and for the first time in months, he feels the momentum shifting in his favor. But he knows the surge in power comes with a cost. Increased scrutiny from the authorities and heightened paranoia within his own ranks. One night, Ramon approaches him with troubling news. One of the men we recruited from Manuel's crew has been asking questions, he says. Too many questions about your movements. I think he's talking to the army. Ignacio listens quietly, then nods. Handle it, he says simply. The man disappears the next day, a reminder to everyone that loyalty is non-negotiable. Ignacio doesn't relish these decisions, but he understands their necessity. Many people still think that rebuilding an empire is about money and firepower. Ignacio knows it's about control, of territory, of information, of perception. So, what do you think? He asks Ramon one night. Can fear and respect ever really be separated? As the months stretch on, Ignacio consolidates his grip on Guadalajara. The weapons from Manzanillo give his men the confidence to hold territory openly again. Small-time traffickers line up to pledge allegiance, preferring Ignacio's quiet efficiency to the chaos of rival factions. But Ignacio is under no illusions. The army, the DEA, and even the Federation are all waiting for him to overreach, to make the kind of mistake that brought down Manuel and countless others. He studies the map on the wall, his gaze settling on Guadalajara. The city is his again, but this time he knows it can be taken from him just as quickly. We've rebuilt, he says quietly to Ramon. Now we make sure no one can tear it down again. The dry heat of early summer blankets Guadalajara as Ignacio Coronel Villarreal stands on the balcony of a discreet apartment overlooking the city he once ruled so openly. He's returned at last, not in a convoy of black SUVs, but as a ghost, moving quietly through the neighborhoods that now pulse once again with his influence. His rebuilt network stretches from the northern suburbs to the industrial corridors on the city's edge. Safe houses are stocked, stash routes re-established, and the weapons cache from Manzanillo has been distributed among his most loyal crews. Yet Ignacio knows this new empire is not the same as the one he lost. It's smaller, tighter, designed to withstand infiltration. Ramon joins him on the balcony, a manila folder in hand. His shoulder has healed, though a faint stiffness remains in his movements. We've consolidated, he reports. The last of Manuel's old crew either flipped to us or disappeared. For the first time in months, the city's quiet. Quiet doesn't mean safe, Ignacio replies, his eyes scanning the glittering lights of Guadalajara. Quiet is when they're watching. The they could be anyone, the army, the DEA, the Sinaloa Federation, or rival cartels waiting for a crack in his defenses. Ignacio has learned to assume all of them are threats. The next morning, news breaks that the army has raided a compound in Tepic, parading seized cash and drugs for the cameras. Ignacio watches the footage on a muted television. He knows the compound was a decoy, left stocked with just enough contraband to satisfy the narrative. They're still chasing ghosts, Ramon says with a faint smile. Good. Ignacio murmurs. Let them keep thinking they're winning. That afternoon, Ignacio meets quietly with a handful of trusted lieutenants in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. They sit around a battered table, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. We don't grow any bigger, Ignacio tells them. The old days of expansion are over. We keep our circles small, our operations clean, and we stay invisible. If the army wants headlines, we'll give them decoys. If the Federation wants stability, we'll give them stability. But no one outside this room will know the full picture. The men nod, understanding the shift in philosophy. Ignacio no longer craves the notoriety that once came with his title as the Crystal King. He wants resilience, something that can't be toppled by a single betrayal or a televised raid. That night, Ignacio sits alone in the apartment, the city lights flickering below. He thinks of the compound in Jalisco, the siege that almost ended his life, and the months spent clawing his way back from the edge. Many people still think that power is about standing at the center of everything, visible and untouchable. Ignacio knows better now. So what do you think? He whispers to himself. Can a man truly win by disappearing? He knows the answer doesn't matter. What matters is that for the first time since the siege, he feels a measure of control. He's rebuilt his empire not as a monument to his name, but as a network designed to endure without him if necessary. In the coming weeks, Ignacio continues to strengthen the foundations. He quietly diversifies his operations, moving resources into legitimate businesses that can't be seized or traced. He trains his lieutenants to operate independently, ensuring no single strike can dismantle everything. By midsummer, Guadalajara has settled into an uneasy calm. Rivals keep their distance, wary of provoking the man who returned from the dead. The Federation tolerates his presence, satisfied that he isn't drawing unwanted attention. And the army, still convinced they're closing in, celebrates hollow victories at abandoned warehouses and fake stash houses. On a warm evening, Ignacio walks through the city incognito, blending easily with the crowds. He passes familiar streets, markets, and plazas, and for a brief moment, he allows himself to feel the city's pulse as an ordinary man. He knows this peace may not last. It never does. But for now, Ignacio Coronel Villarreal has reclaimed his place in Guadalajara, not as the loud, visible Crystal King of old, but as the unseen architect of a network built to survive. Later, back on the balcony, Ignacio watches the city fade into darkness. He closes his eyes and exhales slowly, the sound of distant traffic blending with the hum of the night. Let them think I'm gone, he whispers. I'm exactly where I need to be. As the story of Ignacio Coronel Villarreal closes for tonight, let's slow things down, letting the intensity fade away like the last traces of daylight disappearing beyond the mountains. Picture yourself sitting where Ignacio once stood, on a quiet balcony overlooking a sprawling city at night. The air is warm, the lights below twinkling like scattered stars, each one a small sign of life carrying on. You can hear the soft hum of distant cars on the highway, the murmur of voices drifting from open windows far below, and the faint rustle of leaves moving gently in the breeze. Breathe in slowly, letting your shoulders relax. Feel the weight of the day, the rush of activity, the chatter of your thoughts beginning to slip away. Inhale deeply, then exhale, as if releasing any tension you've been holding. The city below is still, a reminder that there's a rhythm to everything. Even the moments that feel chaotic eventually quiet, and even the storms that seem unending always fade. You can feel that truth now, in the soft quiet of this imagined night. Let your breathing slow, each inhale a little deeper, each exhale a little longer. Picture the stars above shimmering faintly, a steady light guiding you toward rest. You are safe here. You are unseen, protected, exactly where you need to be. Let the darkness wrap gently around you, like a soft blanket, and allow yourself to drift with it. Tomorrow will come soon enough. But for now, you've earned the peace of this moment. Breathe in, breathe out, let go. End of script. Sweet dreams.